Hi, welcome back. Today we're going to be tying a Chewy Caddis. This is just an updated version of a catnip pattern I tied years and years ago. Simple pattern, it's got some flash. It's a great pattern when you have high turbidity, dirtier water, or if you fish in turbulent water where maybe fish have less of a view finder, so to speak, to locate food items. So I just like this when you have lower visibility. To get started, we're going to tie this on a size 12 jig hook. You can tie this in any size, but we're going to be using the jig force in the size 12 along with a 3.8 millimeter tungsten bead black. To add a little bit more weight and to lock in that bead, we're going to take some 15 thousandths lead wire. You can use 20 if you want. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wraps. Lock that. Break that off. Take super glue, get the bead lined up correctly. Drop super glue and then just slide that right in place. It's gonna add a little more weight and keep the bead from sliding. This fly will have a hot spot. It doesn't have to have a hot spot. We're gonna be using a 70 denier, fluorescent orange, tie-in thread. Start behind the lead wire and then kind of work your way in between the grooves of the lead wire just to help secure that. Break off the thread. Okay. This fly is going to have a long holographic flashback. So you can use any sort of material. I'm just going to use some lateral scale. I'm going to take one strand and we're going to double it over. You can use pearl tinsel, you can use sulky, you can use whatever you want. This is just what I have available. So we're going to take one strand of pearl lateral scale, double it over, and we're going to tie this right on top of the hook shank. And we're going to wind back just slightly beyond the bend. We're going to lock that in place. So many color options. You can use so much with this. You can do chartreuse, you can do purple, olive brown. We're going to use an olive, which is one of my favorite colors. Incidentally, it's one of my favorite colors also for the sculpin. But we're going to tie the tip in right here. And to kind of even this thing out a little bit, there's a little bit of a gap between the lead wire and the body. So we take our scissors, we're just going to nip, kind of clean that up. Just tie that tip in right behind the lead wire and just secure that. Once. Keep some tension while you're wrapping on top, and we're going to tie this right on top of the hook shank as well, just right down slightly beyond the bend. Create nice tight tension wraps, and now we're going to proceed with our thread. And if there's any gaps between the lead wire and the hook shank, we can kind of fill that up, so when we're wrapping this polar chenille, we have a nice smooth little ramp. Trying to avoid any sort of hard angles or discrepancies between the gaps between lead wire and the hook shank. Now with the polar chenille, just grab onto this and we can kind of twist. What you'll see is this stuff will twist and turn. We're going to try to get most of the fibers. It's not always going to be perfect, but when you're using this material, when you're tying this on, just try to stretch out that cord. It's going to give you a little bit more control, and it's going to allow those fibers to kind of stick upward. What we're doing is we're imitating a caddis larva. And as you're wrapping, every time you wrap, remember, the material's gonna be twisting, so you may have to make 1 or 2 wraps and then just pause a second and then just use your wrist and kind of untwist that material. So the fibers are angled upward. Just wrapping just like this. This is such wonderful material. You can use this in the larger sizes for streamers. You can use this in the micro size as I am for this caddis, but you can use this also for scuds. You can use it for crest bugs. Just fantastic stuff. We're gonna make a few more wraps, maybe just stopping 1 or 2 wraps short of the bead. Taking your thread, so I don't avoid the camera. Watch it here, come around, just 1 or 2 wraps, and lock that in place. So far, so good. Did I mention I like tying simple patterns? This is just an easy one, in my opinion. And this is about as complicated as a pattern for me will come. And again, you go with perdigons and some of these European style, the more modern thinned out versions. Great idea, especially when you're trying to achieve depth. This fly will achieve depth, but sometimes, again, we're talking about the visibility factor. Is often, when you have lower turbidity or you're trying to, or higher turbidity, what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a visual, something for those fish to locate. And I do like these materials like this where they're going to kind of splay out, create a little bit more of a profile in the water and give the fish a little bit more of an item to pick up for or pick up on in broken water. So for the collar, we're going to do a dub collar. It doesn't have to be dub collar, but I just like the way these collars look when you do a dubbing loop. We're going to use the Jan Saman Peacock Ice Dub or Peacock Dub in a black. And I just like this Saman Peacock dubbing because it seems like when you pull out a little pinch, everything, all the fibers are almost lined up perfectly before you do your dubbing loop. So we're going to pull out a little bit of thread here, double it over. Just a little, just enough, just a little pinch, enough to give you about maybe 1.5, 2 wraps. And I'll lay that right in there. Taking your dubbing loop twister. Tension, and before you start spinning, make sure if there's any fibers that are kind of off keel, get them back in position. We're gonna spin. Remember, when you're doing like a 70 denier, you don't want to do too much because this stuff will break this thread. So that looks pretty good. Now, before we go forward, we can kind of pluck some of this. This is almost like under fur, like with deer hair. What you'll find is sometimes you can kind of thin some of this stuff out before you start making your wraps. Now we're gonna try to get 2 wraps, and we're gonna wrap on the front side of this thread once and twice. Come from behind. Actually, we'll make one more wrap here. I want those legs to protrude under. Then we'll switch this around once, twice, 3 times. Couple wraps to lock that in place. Now, one of the final steps here is you can take Velcro, you can do whatever, use whatever tool, but we're gonna try to pull a lot of these fibers downward, just like imitating the legs of the caddis. And then once we get those legs down, avoiding not to cut we can take our fingers and just kind of protect that. Rather cut my finger than cut the flash. Create a nice landing strip. We're gonna go straight on top and then slightly off the side because we're gonna pull this flash over top to create a flashback, and then we're going to seal this with a UV resin. Add a little density. Now we're going to take our doubled strand of lateral scale, pull this over top, and just make 1 wrap over top to secure that. And if you need to reorient, you can reorient so it's a little bit more on top. Kind of snug that in place. Make 1 pull down. And then just to make sure it prevents or eliminate the chance of this slipping through, we're gonna fold this back onto itself and then make a few more wraps with our thread on top of that. That's gonna prevent that flash from coming undone. Okay, now that's secure. So far, so good. We're gonna build up this hot spot just a little bit more. So we're gonna do our whip finish, and this is how we're going to make 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 wraps. Just so that hot spot is still kind of below the height of the black bead. Okay, lock that in. Again, we're just gonna trim this just a little bit more. We're gonna lay a thin layer of a flexible UV resin on top of this, but we wanna make sure we try to clean this off as much as possible, because if there's any stray fibers, and there's a few here, it's not that bad, but if there's any stray fibers or excessive amounts of stray fibers, it's gonna blotch, kind of create a big blotch of UV resin. So now with our UV resin, we're going to start right at the bead. Here, and we're just going to make sure we work that UV resin on either side, on top of the flash. Then also we can kind of work it on the other side. Just make sure you also kind of lock it in right beyond the bend. Prevent that from breaking off. So it's going to add a little density, but it's also going to protect the flash. Here. Trying to make this look a little more appealing. If it was my personal fly, probably would have been done about 10 seconds ago, but we're going to try to do a nice job here for you. And once you get the layout correctly, or the way you want it to be, that doesn't look too bad. We're going to take our light, a mega light. Going to cure this. Just going to hold that in place. Especially when you're doing with this thicker stuff, just give it the light a little longer exposure with the fly. Undo it. And right there is a Chewy Caddis. Very simple, easy pattern, and I hope you like it.